Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Susan Martinez. And she's going to talk about two of her books. Originally, we had planned to talk about The Lost History of the Little People, which we still plan to talk about that some. However, she has come out with a new book that she'd like to spend a little more time on than she would The Lost History of the Little People. So what I'm going to recommend doing is that we kind of give you a summary or a briefing of The Lost History of Little People, and then move in to the other book that she'd like to discuss that's coming out.
Roy?
It's a lot newer. And a matter of fact, I've got her email address with it. It's right here, The Mysterious Origins of Hybrid Man. I had to go look at the book cover to make sure I had the title right.
Royce, I'm supposed to talk about the little people tonight.
Right. So I thought you wanted to try to get both of them in.
You know how my publisher likes it, but I talk about the one that just came out. The other one won't be out till the winter.
Okay, well, we can have you come back for the other one if you'd rather do that.
That would be great.
Okay. That works just fine for me. All right, so then we are going to talk about the lost history of little people then. And there's plenty of there to talk about. I've read her book, and it's about 330 pages, jam-packed with information about these people. You hear about them when you watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and shows of leprechauns and elves that are, fairy tale made up mythology and stuff like that. But what a lot of people don't realize that her book points out is a lot of these characters were really based upon actual beings from historical records or archaeological finds, things of that nature, that were just brought into the, fantasy section of the movies, in other words, I guess you could say it. And let's let Susan explain that a little bit better than I'm probably doing. Susan, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. Back in the day when they were creating myths, they didn't have television and computer and movies and Hollywood. So they did have mythology to embroider and apply any fancy to facts that we have to dig for the historical part of it.
Okay. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, but first off, I usually ask all my guests to tell me exactly what got them interested in the book that they wrote about as a kind of an icebreaker.
Let me see. Before I tackled the research on this book on the little people, I was debating whether to write about Pan, the lost continent of Pan, which was in the Pacific Ocean, and also known by the names of Mu or Lemuria. Okay, I was debating whether to write a book about Pan, which I've been meaning to for a long time, or to write about the little people. Both of those histories are completely intertwined because the actual survivors of the submersion of Pan were the little people. And that brings us back to 24,000 years ago. Anyway, I decided on writing about the little people. I have a source of information that most people are not aware of.
Yeah, it should be Bible?
Yes.
I might have pronounced that wrong, but from seeing the word in your book several times, that would be how I'd pronounce it offhand.
Say it again.
Oshpi?
Oaspe.
Oaspe? Well, I was not very far off.
Let me break it down. It's the name of that Bible, which came into the world in the year 1882. The name of that Bible, Oaspe, breaks down into three separate syllables. O stands for sky, the canopy of the sky. A-H stands for the earth. It's an American Indian word for earth. And spe is a universal term for spirit. So all put together, it represents the three dwelling places of man: earth, sky, and spirit. Oaspe.
Oaspe. Now, as I give them to understand, you've actually done some study on this here particular Bible, and you've got a degree in it of some sort, or you're considered an authority in it?
Well, yeah. I've been studying it for 30 years. There's no degrees given in it because it's hardly known. We are an international group of OSCE students and scholars, but there's no general recognition for it. My degree was in anthropology and linguistics.
Which qualifies you for this book pretty uniquely, I think.
I think so. I finally got back into my field after studying spiritualism for about 15 years. Then I moved on to the historical stuff.
Well, I noticed you covered an awful lot of historical stuff, and one of the things that you found was that these people have left traces literally in every section of the entire planet at one time or another.
Yes, there's no shortage of information on the little people. In fact, there are many surviving tribes of little people in Africa. They're called pygmies or negrillos. That's the academic term, negrillos. And in other parts of the world, they're called negritos. You have them in Southeast Asia, in the Philippines. There are negritos in South America as well. I have mapped them. Chapter 2 is devoted to the places in today's world where pockets of the little people have survived.
Right. That was one of the things I noticed is that you actually got pictures of some of these negritos that are still living today. And they may not be going by negritos still, and they still might. I'm not sure from reading the book. I may have had a little trouble catching that part, but the thing I've noticed is all the pictures. I mean, you're talking about some of these little people who really, they look like small children of 8 to 10 years old standing next to a grown man, but they were actually a grown man or a grown woman.
That's right. I have one picture in the book of a Negrito man in the Andaman Islands. That's south of India, in the Bay of Bengal. And he's standing there with his son, and you would never know that he's 4'5" because he's little, but he's perfectly proportioned. And that's how the little people, the Ihins, they were called Ihins, the ones who escaped the drowned land of Pan. That's how they were. They were, in fact, they were smaller. They were 3 feet tall, but they were perfectly symmetrical, well-built, and attractive people.
Okay, well, I was going to ask you a little bit about Pan, but before we do, and before I forget, let me remind everybody that if y'all want to ask questions, you can call in. And the call-in number, I had it right up here a minute ago, and I got to come back. Well, I used to have it up here on my website, and I put a new website up, and I don't think I put the new number up yet. I think it was 832-632-7904. I'm doing that off of memory. I'll look it up and get it posted to my website over the next couple of days, however, and I do apologize for that. You can also come to www.talknowradio.com and log into the chat room. Membership to the site is free. It's there to protect from spam bots and ask questions right there in chat. And if you want to learn more about Susan, you can go to her website at www.earthvortex.com. Now, that is your website. Am I correct, Susan?
Yes, it is, but that's devoted to scientific revelations. There's nothing. Okay, let me back up here a second. The Oaspe Bible is a set of revelations. It breaks down into 3 areas of knowledge. One is history, the records of the race on Earth. The other is science, and the other is spirit. three basic areas of knowledge.
Right.
And my website, which I ran with my team, there are the three of us doing this, concerns the science part. And that's very interesting, but it doesn't really apply to the history you were talking about.
Okay.
But anyone is free to go look. And I have an associate in Wasp who's got a terrific website which covers the science as well as the history. And the name of that is www.studyofawaspe.com.
Okay, well, I'm certainly glad you shared that because it can be very helpful. Also, you can scroll down underneath the chat room beyond where you sign up for the newsletter and the banner I put up there, and you'll see a description of the show with her picture and her book cover. And underneath that, you'll see a book cover linked all the way back to Amazon where you can buy it. And just click on that and it'll take you right there. And I'll be putting this in the archives as soon as possible. Which, by the way, Susan, I'll be honest with you, I just found out today the archives aren't working like they're supposed to. It's a new site I just put up, and, well, I didn't know it, but the archive section was broken, so I'm going to have to fix that before I get any archives put in. I got 2 more waiting to be added already, so I may be a little late getting the links to you for that.
Okay.
But getting back to your book, I noticed you did a lot of talking about Pam throughout the book, off and on. And one of the things that I kept thinking about, and you even touched on it once, was Pangaea. Because at one time, the theory goes that the world was kind of more or less half landmass, half ocean, and it broke into continents, and that's the Pangaea theory, I'm already aware you know. And I'm thinking what you're trying to say in your book is that's where Mu is at. What's left of Pangaea, as Mu is right where Noah and Shem and his sons got their start at. Is that correct?
Yeah. The Pangaea concept, which you just described, has to do with the concept that originally all the land masses of the Earth were closer together. You know, the classical examples have the outline of Eastern South America makes a perfect fit with the outline of Western Africa. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yes, ma'am.
If you put them together, they would fit just perfect. Okay, now, if you take all the land masses of the world and scrunch them back together, you know, conceptually, there would be a big open space in the Pacific Ocean.
Where Mu sank.
Yeah. Right, and whenever I talk about this, it always comes down to the Noah and his ark story. And in fact, the way I see it, the way I tell the story, is that these sons, Noah and his sons, Shem, Ham, Japheth, and 2 more sons, are the same as what I'm talking about, the little people, that they were little people from the continent of Pan. And when they dispersed to the different divisions of the earth in their flight from Pan, they settled in each of those regions and brought their knowledge with them. I want to comment on that and say that this understanding of history is almost the opposite of what the Atlantis theorists are teaching. What the Atlantis people are saying is that when this continent was submerged in the Atlantic Ocean 12,000 years ago, that it destroyed a high civilization and left people back to dwelling in the caves and wiped out the knowledge that they had. Now, what I'm saying is that with destruction of the continent of Pan, the people of higher knowledge, who were the little people, were the survivors. They were not destroyed. Their knowledge was not lost. In fact, the ones who went down with Pan were really their enemies. They were the lower tribes. They were very primitive tribes that had that were persecuting them and exterminating them left and right. So what went down in Pan, what went down in the Great Deluge, in the Great Flood, was what were the enemies of the people of light. And it was not a universal flood either. That's the other way that the flood is portrayed in the literature, as universal. It was universally remembered by the people wherever the Ihans settled. But the world was not inundated. It was the continent of Pan that was submerged.
Right. Now, I think a lot of people get the idea that it was a worldwide flood because of the Bible.
Oh, the Bible, and as well as many native traditions, because of it was exaggerated to that extent.
I'm not 100% sure, and I'd have to really go back and look at the Bible to see, because I haven't read it in many years. But from my memory, when I read it before, I don't think the Bible ever technically, per se, said Noah's flood was worldwide.
It may not. And the other people who point to a worldwide flood are the Ice Age theorists. Because what they're saying is that when the Ice Age ended 12,000 years ago, all that ice melting flooded the world. But that's another topic that I have taken on and shown the mythology of it.
And you know what? While you were speaking, I did go and check, and I don't see anywhere on here where it says it was a worldwide flood. I think that's just largely assumed from the wording of it. People, like, for instance, they read the nativity scene, and they get the idea that Jesus was born in a manger in a cave, although that's not really what the Bible says either. It's so easy to accidentally jump to a conclusion without reading something carefully, is what I'm saying.
Right, and like Noah's Ark, the business of taking animals with them, that's pure mythology, because when the people escaped from the continent of Pan, they escaped with their lives. They didn't have to take animals. It was not a worldwide inundation. They just got themselves out of there. So there's a lot, it's a tremendous mixed bag, what we get in mythology as well as the world's Bibles, a mixed bag of fact and fiction.
Right. Well, I was going to also ask you about how Atlantis does fit into this, because there does seem to be a great amount of proof that Atlantis did exist. So I have to wonder, did it exist at the same time as Mu? Was it one of the places that became a separate place when the continent split up, or was it later founded by people escaping from Mu, or exactly what the story was on that?
I don't follow the Atlantis literature, but it's inevitable that you come across it because it's everywhere when you start reading about the past. But I have a couple of ideas about it.
Well, I'd be interested in hearing if you want to share.
There may be parts of the western coast of Europe and Africa that are submerged, and there may likewise be parts of the eastern coast of America that are submerged, and whatever higher culture was living there could have been translated in later ideas to the Atlantis idea. All of the Atlantis Atlantologists go back to Plato's dialogue. Plato, I mean, he lived 2,400 years ago. I mean, who says that he was right?
Well, that is true, and he says he got his story from Solon, who supposedly had went to Egypt and saw the story on a stele over there, if I remember correctly. The only problem with that is, to my knowledge, these stele with a story on it have never been found.
I'm sorry?
Okay, as I understand Plato's story, he got it from an ancestor named Solon, who went to Egypt, and the Egyptians showed Solon a stele that had the story recorded on it. What I'm saying is the thing about it to me is, to my knowledge, the stele that had the Atlantis story engraved on it has never been found by archaeology anywhere.
Well, yes, that may be true. And what was that?
So, I mean, that means if they don't find the stele, where's the verification of what Solon told Plato?
Yeah, and what I said before comes into play here, because the Atlantis story says that a great civilization was wiped out, and, they had to more or less start from scratch. But the material that I uncover in my books says the opposite, that a group of people surviving from the Pacific landmass brought civilization to the barbarians in the rest of the world and uplifted them. So I'm tracing an entirely different history than what the Atlantis people are talking about.
Yeah, that I've read somewhere, and I'm trying to remember where, that during the days of Mu, they had conflict with barbarians somewhere. And I'm thinking there is a possibility, if the Atlantis was existing at the time of Mu, that Atlantis could have been full of these barbarians, and they were giving the Lemurians a hard time, and then when the flood happened, it sank Mu and Atlantis at the same time, only the Lemurians may have escaped to go continue on where the Atlanteans may not have.
The way I see it is that every continent had barbarians. The world was full of barbarians. At 24,000 years ago, the barbarians had exterminated the little people all over the world, except
which you write about pretty extensively in your book.
On the continent of Mu. I didn't catch what you said.
I said you wrote about that pretty extensively in your book. It tells the whole story about how they were mistreated and taken advantage of. And in fact, from what I read, I understood it, it was the people of Cain on his line that were harassing the original eye hands, I guess is what you call them.
Yeah. They were a holy people. They were a sacred people, and they kept apart. They tried to keep apart from the rest of the uncivilized people of the world. This is what it was like 24,000 years ago. But they were exterminated everywhere except on the continent of Pan. And the same thing was happening on Pan. They were hiding out. They were hiding in the mountains, hiding out from, Cain, with the mark of blood. That's another word for those tribes of darkness that destroyed the little people.
Okay. Now, were the Ihans, were they noted for building big elaborate cities? Much like the cities that were followed later in Samaria and other places?
Could you just rephrase that question? And I'm anxious to answer it, but I want to see exactly what you said.
Okay, I'm trying to think if I worded that the right way. So I'm trying to see if, because what I read from your book, the Ihans, they were more involved into spirituality, and they built earth mounds. Like their cities were not like cities that the bigger people built, for example. They dealt with mounds, whereas the followers of Cain were probably building big building cities, in other words.
Right. I'm trying to figure that all out myself, but the original cities were from the Ihans, the sacred little people. They were built on mounds. They knew the arts of mining. They knew the art of navigation. They were astronomers. And you know, they received most of their knowledge for these things spiritually, because that's what they were. They were people who were able to commune with the spirit world, and the higher powers instructed them in all these things. Then there was a certain amount of intermarriage, and a tall race came out of that, and they became the sun kingdoms of the Mesolithic period. So that when we're talking about those buried cities, most of them are from say, 15,000, 18,000 years ago. And the kingdoms, you see, the little people had a kind of egalitarian society. They did not have kings or believe in kings, but it was the other people I was talking about, the larger people of the Sun Kingdoms, who did build magnificent cities and have kingdoms, and that's where despotism came in, and where theocracies came in, and all that prehistorical stuff. They were already a corrupt race. We tend to idolize them because of the great pyramids they built and the golden treasures that they left. But they were already corrupt people. Among them were the people who were destroying the sacred tribes.
Okay,
These
so
are
the
pretty complicated history.
Right, it is pretty complicated. I've noticed that during my years of study myself. Now, one thing I was going to say is what you're saying here is pretty clearly is that the little people were not responsible for building, say, like the guys of Pyramid or Stonehenge. They were not interested in such big monuments, in other words.
Absolutely. They were not interested in glory. They were not interested in gaudy things or material possessions. They were the priests of the oldest age, and they were even the priests to the Sun Kingdoms, but they tried to live apart.
Okay, well, one of the things you talked about in your book that got my interest was the massive amount of interbreeding that's went on down ever since the beginning of time, which I think even the Bible that everybody reads, the King James, records that pretty faithfully. But what it doesn't talk about, because, again, you said yourself there were bigger people and littler people, but originally there was one people, and they had to all be little people, even according to the Bible. So in order to get people that are, say, like my height, or 5'8" or 5'10", I'm bigger than that, but I'm just saying, rather than, say, 10 feet or 12 feet, in order to get that mid-sized person, there had to be probably, I would say, bigger people than the average-sized people, or the middle-sized people in there. Is there an accounting for, say, like, more than one size set of people that was doing this intermixing?
Well, that's where the sequel to the Little People book comes in.
So I'm kind of jumping the gun a little bit.
I'll try to answer you as vaguely as possible.
Okay.
No, I'm just kidding. But okay, let me just tell you one formula that I present in the sequel, and that might help. When races crossbreed, this is something that a geneticist can tell you. With a hybrid, there's a tendency for the hybrid to be bigger and stronger than the two crossbreeding races. And this, I think, is what happened in the human race. You had, in the beginning, only two races, the little people and the tree people. They were human beings, but they...
Hello, everyone. Welcome to Paranormal Palace Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And joining me today is going to be Susan Martinez. And she's going to talk about two of her books. Originally, we had planned to talk about The Lost History of the Little People, which we still plan to talk about that some. However, she has come out with a new book that she'd like to spend a little more time on than she would The Lost History of the Little People. So what I'm going to recommend doing is that we kind of give you a summary or a briefing of The Lost History of Little People, and then move in to the other book that she'd like to discuss that's coming out.
Roy?
It's a lot newer. And a matter of fact, I've got her email address with it. It's right here, The Mysterious Origins of Hybrid Man. I had to go look at the book cover to make sure I had the title right.
Royce, I'm supposed to talk about the little people tonight.
Right. So I thought you wanted to try to get both of them in.
Tackled the research on this book on the little people. I was debating whether to write about Pan, the lost continent of Pan, which is this, was in the Pacific Ocean, and also known by the names of Mu or Lemuria. Okay, I was debating whether to write a book about Pan, which I've been meaning to for a long time, or to write about the little people. Both of those histories are completely intertwined because the actual survivors of the submersion of Pan were the little people. And that brings us back to 24,000 years ago. Anyway, I decided on writing about the little people. I have a source of information that most people are not aware of.
Yeah, it should be Bible.
Yes.
I'm out of fantasy section of the movies, in other words, I guess you could say it. And let's let Susan explain that a little bit better than I'm probably doing. Susan, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing fine. You know, back in the day when they were creating this, they didn't have television and computer and movies and Hollywood. So but they did have mythology to embroider and apply any fancy to facts that we have to dig for the historical part of it.
Okay. Well, one of the things I wanted to ask you about, well, first off, I usually ask all my guests to tell me exactly what got them interested in the book that they wrote about as a kind of an icebreaker.
Let me see. You know, before I, you know how my publisher likes it, but I talk about the one that just came out. The other one won't be out till the winter.
Okay, well, we can have you come back for the other one if you'd rather do that.
That would be great.
Okay. That works just fine for me. All right, so then we are going to talk about the lost history of little people then. And there's plenty of there to talk about. I've read her book, and it's about 330 pages, jam-packed with information about these people. I mean, you hear about them when you watch Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs and shows of leprechauns and elves that are, you know, fairy tale made-up mythology and stuff like that. But what a lot of people don't realize that her book points out is a lot of these characters were really based upon actual beings from historical records or archaeological finds, things of that nature, that were just brought into the, you know, pronounce that wrong, but from seeing the word in your book several times, that would be how I'd pronounce it offhand.
Say it again.
Oshpi.
Oaspe.
Oaspe. Well, I was not very far off.
Let me break it down. It's the name of that Bible, which came into the world in the year 1882. The name of that Bible, Oaspe, breaks down into three separate syllables. O stands for sky, the canopy of the sky. A-H stands for the earth. It's an American Indian word for earth. And spe is a universal term for spirit. So all put together, it represents the three dwelling places of man: earth, sky, and spirit.